My sister claimed she was pregnant with my husband's child, but I revealed a secret that destroyed them, and nothing was ever the same again. I never thought betrayal would come wrapped in the face of the two people I trusted most. That night, when my sister smiled across the table and slipped her hand into my husband's, the world as I knew it collapsed. The restaurant's laughter blurred, the clinking glasses faded, and all I could hear was her voice. "I'm pregnant, and it's David's." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My younger sister, Beatrice, the one I had practically raised when our parents couldn't, sat there glowing, as if she had won a prize. David, my husband of 4 years, didn't even look ashamed. He looked relieved, like a man finally set free. I wanted to scream, to shatter every glass on that table, but my body froze. Instead, I watched them waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to lose control and embarrass myself. But I stayed calm. Too calm. I left money on the table, wished them well with a voice that didn't sound like mine, and walked out into the night with a hollow chest. When I got home, the apartment felt like a museum of lies. His toothbrush still in the bathroom, his clothes hanging neatly in the closet, the framed photos of us smiling as if happiness had been real. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message. "I'm at B's house. We'll talk tomorrow." He even called her B now. I lay awake until sunrise, my mind racing through every detail I had ignored. The late nights at work, Beatrice suddenly showing up in Austin for client meetings, the way she always asked about my schedule. The signs had been there, but I had been too focused on my career, too eager to share every success with them. And now my biggest victory, a long-awaited promotion, had turned into the backdrop for my deepest humiliation. But what neither of them knew was that I held a secret far bigger than theirs. One that would not only change the way they looked at me, but destroy the fragile fantasy they had built together. And for the first time since that night, I felt something other than pain. I felt power. The next morning, sunlight poured into the apartment like nothing had changed, but inside me, everything had. I made coffee out of habit, sat at the kitchen counter, and stared at my phone. Dozens of unread messages blinked, David begging me to answer, Beatrice writing sugary apologies that felt like daggers. I didn't respond. Instead, I showered, dressed in my sharpest suit, and went to work as if nothing had happened. My promotion had come with a new office, glass walls, and a team that now looked at me with respect. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't need David to feel whole. I had built this life myself. At lunch, I stepped outside and called my mother. I didn't tell her everything, just that Beatrice had crossed a line. There was silence on the other end before she whispered, "Marina, it's not the first time." My grip on the phone tightened. What did she mean by that? But she quickly changed the subject, insisting we talk in person. When I came home that evening, David was waiting at the door. His eyes were puffy, his shirt wrinkled, like he hadn't slept. "Please just listen," he begged. I moved past him without a word. He followed me inside, words spilling out like broken glass. He claimed it had been a mistake, that he never planned for this to happen, but that love is love. I laughed, sharp at her. Love? With my sister? He winced, but then, with a strange boldness, he said, "You're strong, Marina. You'll land on your feet. Beatrice, she needs me." It was in that moment I realized he truly believed he could leave me broken and run off into a happy little family with her. He thought I'd cry, maybe beg, and then vanish quietly. But instead of tears, I felt a surge of calm fire. They had no idea what I knew. They had no idea that their little fairy tale was about to collapse before it even began. I let David talk until his words ran out, and the silence in the room grew heavier than any argument. He finally sighed, muttered something about sleeping at B's, and left. The door shut, and with it, the last illusion of my marriage. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, pulling out the folder I had kept hidden for months. Inside were documents, contracts, receipts, email printouts. The kind of things most people would notice, but I had been trained to. Being in corporate management teaches you to see patterns, and David's finances had always been inconsistent. At first, I thought he was just careless. But 3 months ago, I'd hired a private accountant to quietly review his accounts. What she found made my stomach turn. Loans in Beatrice's name co-signed by David, hidden transfers, even a down payment on a townhouse in San Antonio listed under future family expenses. all while pretending to split groceries with me. That's why when Beatrice smiled smugly across the restaurant table announcing her pregnancy, I didn't collapse. Because I already knew she wasn't just stealing my husband, she was sinking herself with him. The cruelest irony? David's so-called future family, dream, had been built on my money. Every loan approval, every credit check, every piece of leverage, they had only worked because of my spotless financial record, the one I had worked my entire career to build. Without me, their little empire would fall apart in weeks. And they didn't even know I had proof. The next day, I scheduled dinner with my parents. My mother's voice from before still echoed in my head. It's not the first time. When we sat down at her kitchen table, I asked her directly. She hesitated, then finally admitted Beatrice had a history. A married professor in college. A co-worker with a newborn at home. Every time, she slipped away with no consequences, protected by excuses and my parents' endless pity. But this time, I whispered, staring at my mother, she picked the wrong man. Because he was mine. And I'm not staying silent. That weekend, Beatrice invited me to lunch, as if we were two sisters simply catching up. I almost laughed at the audacity. She chose a trendy cafe, the kind of place where everyone takes photos of their food. When I arrived, she was already there. Hair perfectly styled, hands resting protectively on her flat stomach as though she were already a glowing mother. "Marina, I'm glad you came," she said, reaching for my hand. "I know it's hard, but one day you'll understand. Love can't be controlled." I pulled my hand back, smiling faintly. "Oh, I understand perfectly. I just think you've underestimated me." Her eyebrows shot up. For a second, I saw it, the flicker of insecurity behind her confidence. I leaned closer. "You know, it's fascinating how fast David moves on. A townhouse, loans, joint accounts, all in just 3 months. Very ambitious of you, too." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What are you talking about?" I shrugged casually, sipping my coffee. "Let's just say I pay attention to details. You always forget that about me." She laughed nervously, but her voice cracked. "You don't know what you're saying." "Oh, but I do." I stood, dropped a $20 bill on the table, and leaned down so only she could hear me. "Enjoy the little dream you're building, B. It's standing on my name, my money, and my silence. Imagine what happens when I take those away." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, but I walked out before she could speak. That night, David called again, his voice low and defensive. "What did you say to Beatrice?" "She's upset." I let him stew in the silence before answering. "Don't worry, David. I haven't revealed the secret yet. But when I do," I paused, letting the words sink in, "neither of you will recover." For the first time, he didn't know what to say. And I smiled to myself, realizing the balance of power had shifted. By Monday morning, the calls had turned desperate. David left voicemails that swung between pleading and threatening. Beatrice sent long messages filled with excuses, each one more dramatic than the last. How she never meant to hurt me, how she just followed her heart, how I was strong enough to let go. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on my promotion. My new role gave me access to people David and Beatrice could only dream of meeting. Every email I sent, every meeting I led, reminded me that I had something they couldn't steal: credibility. And credibility was the weapon I planned to use. That afternoon, I stopped by the bank where David and I had our joint account. I sat across from the manager, a man I'd worked with professionally before, and slid over the folder of documents. "I'd like to freeze any joint activity effective immediately," I said calmly. "There's been unauthorized use of my credit." He looked at the papers, then at me, and nodded. "Consider it done." Just like that, their townhouse payments, their little shopping sprees, their fragile illusion of stability, it all crumbled. And they had no idea it was me pulling the strings. That evening, I finally answered David's call. His voice was sharp with frustration. "Why is the bank saying our accounts are restricted? What did you do?" "Our accounts." I repeated softly. "You mean my accounts? Everything in your new life is standing on ground you don't own, David. And now the ground is gone." There was silence, then a curse, then Beatrice's voice faintly in the background, demanding to know what was happening. I ended the call with a simple, "This is only the beginning." For the first time since the betrayal, I felt something close to satisfaction. But I wasn't finished. The financial blow was just step one. The real destruction, the secret that would shatter them beyond repair, was still waiting. I booked my parents' backyard for a celebration 2 weeks later. It was my promotion after all, a neat excuse to gather everyone and the perfect stage. I told a few close colleagues to come as friends so the room wouldn't feel empty. I told my mother I wanted to make peace, which she believed because she still loved the idea of us as a normal family. Beatrice thought I'd come to beg. David assumed I'd stay away. Both were wrong. The guest list was deliberate. My boss, the bank manager who'd placed the freeze, a lawyer I trusted, and a mutual friend who'd seen Beatrice's suspicious pregnancy posts. I hired a caterer and arranged a seating so nowhere felt like an ambush. I didn't want tears or yelling to look staged. I wanted truth. Calm, irrefutable facts presented in daylight. When they arrived, everyone exchanged the usual small talk. Beatrice floated in like a queen on a cloud, hand on her stomach, smiling with the practiced innocence of someone convinced they'd already won. David walked in stiff, eyes darting. I could see the calculations behind them. He expected me to be pathetic. She expected me to explode. Instead, I greeted them both warmly, kissed my mother, and asked for a few minutes to say something before dessert. The murmurs softened. Cameras, my colleagues, were casually raised on phones. I started not with accusation but with numbers, the precise, boring numbers that strip romance of its glow. Loans, transfers, signatures. I spoke about dates and receipts and then passed the folder across the table to my mother. Copies of loan applications, the townhouse paperwork, and bank transfers traced directly to accounts David had opened with my clean credit history. The color drained from Beatrice's face. David's jaw clenched like a muscle trying to hold back a storm. Then I did something I hadn't planned from anger but from strategy. I invited the bank manager to explain, calmly and legally, what a freeze means and what consequences false representation and co-signing could trigger. He explained it to the whole yard in exact, unemotional language: foreclosure, loan defaults, credit investigations. The rustle of napkins sounded loud. A few of my cousins whispered. Beatrice's friend touched her arm, then slid it away. I let them sit with that for a beat. Power, I learned, is quieter than rage. When I looked at them, they were no longer conspirators. They were spectators to their own unraveling. I closed that part with a sentence I had practiced in the quiet of sleepless nights. This is the part where your dream stops relying on my silence. Beatrice lunged for outrage. She stood, voice shaking but sharp. You're lying. You planted this. You're trying to ruin us because you can't accept losing him. She cried the way actresses cry, melodramatic, crafted for attention, and some of the older aunts leaned in, feeling sympathy for the wounded younger woman. David, sensing rescue, pulled at his collar, ready to play the noble wronged man. I let them have 2 minutes. I swallowed the urge to tear her down with the faster, nastier truths I'd collected. Instead, I pressed play on a different kind of proof: timestamps on apartment listings, emails from property managers, and a recorded acceptance letter, not illegal hackery, all documented public correspondence that showed deposit transfers and habitually mismatched explanations for the money. My lawyer stood, explained chain of custody, and made the facts hard to deny. I could see them searching their faces for composure. Then Beatrice did something desperate. She accused me of overreaching, of weaponizing my career. You always needed to control everything, she whispered, making it sound like evidence. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. But my boss, who'd known me for years, stood and told a very different story of late nights, leadership, and how I'd mentored a dozen people in a room. My credibility had weight. Theirs had begun to look like an act. David tried a new tactic: charm. He laughed nervously and said, Mari, you're making this spectacle. It was an old line: minimize, gaslight, make the victim seem unreasonable. I smiled, then the most dangerous kind of smile, the one that told him none of it worked anymore. I didn't come here for spectacle, I said softly. I came here because you lied to me. And because if you can lie to me, you can lie to other people. But they were rattled now. Neighbors were asking questions. The family group chats lit up with texts. And amid the chatter, a small voice, a woman from David's car club, asked, very loud and very practical, who's paying that mortgage if the credit disappears? Silence followed, like a held breath before collapse. There was one last thread holding their fantasy together, the baby. If people believed there was a child coming, sympathy could cushion the fall. If Beatrice could convince enough hearts that she was carrying an innocent life, she might salvage marriage and family image. I couldn't let that happen. Not after what they'd done. So I brought the medical paperwork. Not private in an illegal way. I'd used the legal channels available to someone who had been listed as a contact on several insurance communications. I'd requested records that showed prenatal appointment dates and ultrasound files submitted to insurance for coverage. The clinic's administrative director, who knew me professionally through corporate healthcare programs, agreed to speak, quietly and on record, about dates and services billed. We weren't intruding on private moments. We were checking the public trail of medical claims that are part of any pregnancy's paper map. I spread the ultrasound files on the table and the appointment timestamps. There was a glaring inconsistency. Several ultrasound images circulating on Beatrice's social media were not dated in the clinic system and matched files from a generic online stock source, the kind of image any image search could pull up. When I asked the director if the clinic had billed for those specific scans, the answer was no. She said with visible regret, "We have no record of those images being performed here." Beatrice's scream was short and empty. "You can't prove anything," she shouted. David reached for her, as if proximity could steady them. But the digital age is merciless. Someone in the yard, one of my colleagues, had already done a reverse image search in the quiet between speeches. The feed on the big screen TV I'd set up for slides flickered, and there it was, the same ultrasound image posted on a parenting blog 2 years earlier. The murmurs turned to gasps. Then, because I wanted the truth to be undeniable, I quietly arranged a non-invasive prenatal paternity test through a reputable lab, the kind where maternal blood provides fetal DNA and a cheek swab gives a paternal sample. I had done it with legal consent from David 2 nights earlier. He'd given me his swab under the pretense of clearing up stress and rumors, if anything came up. I'd presented it to the lab as a routine check. When the results came back, the lab confirmed what the numbers already suggested. The fetal DNA did not match David's profile. He was not the biological father. The yard was a basket of held breaths. Beatrice folded into herself. David's face emptied in a way I'd never seen. Not anger, not sorrow, just the slow, stunned recognition that the story he'd been living was a lie. After the paternity results were read aloud, yes, aloud, because secrecy had been the entire tool of their deception, the scene transformed from scandal to legal reality. My lawyer explained the implications: fraud in loan applications, potential charges for falsifying documents, and exposure to civil suits if the townhouse purchase involved misrepresentation. The bank manager confirmed that investigations were already opening. I watched their shoulders fold, as if someone had removed the weight they'd been pretending to carry. Relatives split. Some stayed with them in stunned loyalty. Others, who had seen small signs and had silently disliked Beatrice's manipulations for years, started asking blunt questions. My mother's face crumpled, not exactly at what I did, but at the ugliness that had been in her home and gone unchallenged for too long. She reached for Beatrice and whispered, "Why?" The question trembled with all the small failures and protective instincts, and the pity that follows when you realize someone you love chose their hunger over you. Beatrice, reduced from a performative drama queen to a woman with nowhere to hide, tried bargaining. "I'm pregnant," she whispered to people who had just seen the test. "I can still be a mother." But the word had lost its power. Sympathy was not the same as immunity. David sat on the patio steps, head between his hands, occasionally lifting his face to scan for friends. Some walked away. Others stood, stunned, mouths forming apologies neither of them deserved nor would accept. When the investigators contacted us formally a week later, Beatrice called me at midnight. Her voice was small, for once not rehearsed. I thought this would make us a family," she said. "We were going to start over." I could hear the siren in the distance of her own choices closing in. I felt nothing generous in me at that instant, only a hollow certainty that truth, once set loose, doesn't care about comfort. I told her quietly, "You started a lie that hurt a lot of people. You have to live with what you chose." The divorce papers were formal, sterile, and oddly liberating. David tried to argue for joint custody of things that mattered to him, my time, shared friends, as if those had belonged to him to begin with. The attorney made it clear how the financial evidence would affect settlements and that his credibility would be a steep hill to climb in any custody or support negotiations. In plain terms, the facade of his moral high ground was gone. Beatrice faced potential charges for fraud and was ordered to attend counseling and restitution hearings. The townhouse reverted to the bank's custody pending legal decision. Our family didn't collapse into a final catastrophe. People regrouped, lines were redrawn, allegiances altered. My mother and I had long, tear-filled talks about parenting and enabling, and how she would make amends the only way she knew how. Small, consistent changes over time. Some relatives never spoke to me again. Some thanked me awkwardly for dragging the mess into the light. Truth is messy. It doesn't tidy the pieces into something pretty. In the quiet after the storm, my real life began to assert itself again. I kept the job I'd fought for, though I declined one promotion to regain balance. I found a small therapist who helped me untangle betrayal from identity. I slept more. I dated once clumsily and remembered how to laugh at bad jokes. I learned to separate the person I had been with the person I was becoming. There was a moment weeks later, ordinary and profound. I was at the farmer's market buying tomatoes, and a little boy ran past, bumping my leg, and asking if he could taste a sample. He grinned, sticky with juice, and his mother mouthed a thank you as she hustled him away. I looked down and realized my hands were steady. The panic that had lived behind my ribs for months had thawed into something quieter, resilience. I'd exposed the secret that destroyed their lie, but what it gave me back was not revenge. It was the permission to start again on my own terms. That doesn't mean the wounds aren't still there. I keep a folder labeled evidence in a drawer I rarely open. Sometimes when I do, I feel the old rush of power, the knowledge that I changed the course of things. Other times I close it and walk outside, where the morning sun is simply warm and indifferent. Life, I discovered, is less about the dramatic reveal and more about the small, honest choices you make after the noise dies down.